Good evening and welcome to the October 21st, 2021 meeting of the Tupelo Planning Committee. Please take a moment to silence your cell phones. At this time, please rise for the invocation given by Gus Hildenbrand and the Pledge of Allegiance by Patty Thompson.
Let us pray. Dear Lord, we certainly thank you for this wonderful day that you've given us, a day that we can enjoy, that has been a pleasure to most of us. Be with us as we go about this meeting tonight. May the decisions and the discussion that we make be pleasing to you and to the citizens of the city. We ask that you be with us all through this, for we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Attention, salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You may be seated. The Tupelo Planning Committee is a volunteer group appointed by the mayor and approved by the city council. We receive no compensation for this as we do it as a community service. We spend a lot of time on our own funds studying and researching the applications and visiting the sites that are on our agenda each month. We ask that you remember we do not take our positions on any application lightly. Our decisions are based on facts as they are presented and with regard to the regulations set forth in the city code. At this time, I'd like to ask the staff and committee members to introduce themselves, starting with Pat on my right.
I'm Pat Faulkner, City Planner.
Lindsay Leak.
Scott Davis.
Patty Thompson.
Gus Hildenbrand.
Leslie Morris. Pam Hadley.
Russ Wilson, zoning administrator, and our city attorney.
Who's deep in thought right now. Let's see, no minutes from the last meeting or the council items. All right, so tonight we're here to discuss the key provisions and considerations of proposed Mississippi Medical Cannabis Act. At this point, I'd like to turn over to the city attorney, Ben Logan, to tell us about everything here.
All right.
Do you want to go there so they can give you on the phone? I know they better do that. That one has my phone. Oh, that's right.
All right, this is a topic that has been debated in this state for several years now, and last fall the initiative passed in some places by wide margin, 70%. I think here in Lee County, depending on how the ballot was structured, you looked at something like 60 to 65% of Lee County voted for medical marijuana or medical cannabis. And we're not here to debate whether the city is for it or against it. That decision will become later. About a month ago, we had pretty good indication from our legislative delegation in Jackson that a special session was imminent to be held about the Medical Cannabis Act. There were several legislators, a couple of senators, a couple of representatives that had worked out a compromise on this. It had been debated in the earlier session in Jackson after the Mississippi Supreme Court throughout the initiative process, and there was quite a bit of discussion at that time. This particular bill that is being discussed right now is very similar to a bill that was introduced in the 2021 legislative session. And I believe that Senator Blackwell from DeSoto and Marshall County, if you wanted to look that up, that bill and compare it to what is being discussed now, I have a draft copy of what's being discussed. It's 144 pages long. And unless you just want to get down into the line-by-line details of that. We have summarized it as it pertains to this committee and to our development code, and extracted those provisions on issues and considerations that we need to discuss in preparation for either the passage of it, if it's not passed, and we just, haven't wasted our time, but we have at least spent our time in preparation for something that could take place. This legislation will affect more than just development of our municipalities and counties, but it will affect the law enforcement, employment policies, revenue streams, and it touches on many of the chapters and titles in the Mississippi Code. But what we want to focus in on today is just the impact it'll have on us in running our development services department, and then also our community and how our development code will be applied. The decision will be made. It's a little different than what went with alcohol back in the 60s, where that you could opt in and be dry, or opt out. And you didn't have to opt out. You had to opt in, otherwise you were considered to be opted out of legalizing beer and liquor, or going wet or dry. The medical cannabis legislation is just the opposite. You're in unless you vote to get out. And so our city councilman, I think we have 3 here tonight, will have that decision if it is passed in the legislature to opt out. They do not have to do anything to opt in. The upside to not opting out is the amount of sales tax that will be realized. I think that is one of the few benefits to the local community, other than just traffic that may spin off into some other areas. This is a medical only. It is not recreational use. I'm not here tonight to advocate opting in or opting out. I just want you 3 and the other 4 to be able to make an informed decision as to, if we opt out, what are the consequences. If we do not opt out or stay in, what we have to do to be prepared for our community. The legislature allows local ordinances to apply. Our ordinance is our development code. A lot of folks see that as the zoning ordinance or the zoning code, but we call it development code here. And that is how different areas of town are categorized, or what uses can take place in those places. It allows us to come up with a licensing type of situation similar to other businesses in town. They'll have to come see Russ to make sure that they can go in a different place. There are different types of medical cannabis facilities that will be, one may be appropriate in this particular zone, whereas it is not appropriate in another zone. There will not be any facilities in a residential zone. They're looking at agricultural, commercial, and industrial zones. Now, y'all are familiar with our development code because y'all deal with it, every month. And we have our commercial broken down into different types of commercial activities. And so, whereas some commercial activities are allowable in certain zones, other types of commercial activities are not allowed in those zones. What we're looking at is pairing up, and you'll see in some of the definitions that are the definitions by and large in the first part of the handout are directly from that legislation. Now, when you get back into the considerations and also a proposed list of definitions in our zoning ordinance, then we have kind of massaged those to fit with what we are intending to protect, those protected locations, and also to fit those medical cannabis facilities to things that are already in our zoning or development code. For instance, a dispensary, that would sound like a drugstore. So we would turn to, in our development code, to those areas where a drugstore would be allowed. Their transportation facilities, that's easy. We go to our trucking terminals or whatever. The research, it gets tricky because I don't know anything about processing, cultivating, processing, or researching or extracting marijuana. I don't know that one of these uses that you might not have a grow area that also has in that building or facility a processing or a research type facility or use in that same building. Primarily in looking at cultivation facilities, we would look at agricultural open in locating those. However, if you were to combine that with the processing of it, which sounds like light manufacturing, very similar to our meat distillery on McCullough Boulevard, which is an allowable zone, it's basically the processing of an agricultural product, and we have allowed that as a light manufacturing in that zone. So there's some things that we'll have to work through to place those on that table, what is it, 4.3 pad, where you have everything that you can think of that we have put in there, and it has a spreadsheet of which different zones that they can go in. Early on, we had a particular interest in downtown. We consulted with the Downtown Main Street Association and TRA, Tupelo Redevelopment Agency, as to their thoughts on, what that would look like. There are limitations as to the location of dispensaries or any facilities. Those facilities cannot be within 1,000 feet of a church. And what that means could range from the actual church building to church activities. What we're proposing is that if a church runs a food pantry several blocks away, then that's a church activity or a church. Some child care facilities, you could argue that that's just daycare. However, we have a new pediatric clinic right behind us, and if that's not a child care facility, then what is it? And then the other is, in looking at the churches, what about cemeteries, funeral homes, things where religious type practices or activities are performed. And the final one is schools and school-related type activities. Looking at that 1,000-foot distance, the legislation or proposed legislation states from the main entrance of that location and main point of entrance. Well, all of us, that go to church know that there are different main points of entrance just in about every church. And so when we did our studies, we first looked at downtown with the churches, schools, and child care centers. And you will see that on one of the maps that we have of the downtown area. If you don't have that, I've got one here. And it kind of looks like there's not a whole lot of places that are outside of 1,000 feet of any of those protected locations. So but they're similar to what we have on our alcohol ordinance and that part of our development code. There can be variances, probably should call them waivers, of that distance by a certain protected activity. We did generate a more comprehensive map citywide. It's kind of hard to look at because you can see that there are a lot of churches, schools, daycare facilities in the city, and I'm sure that this doesn't identify all of them. But in looking at that 1,000-foot requirement from a main point of entrance, I think it, just take for instance First Baptist. I mean, the 11 o'clock service is the main point of entrance is back there on the west side. The early service is probably either going up the steps or going in the side further down on that side. Same with schools, different bus routes, different ways to get in and out. So that's something that we'll further define in a zoning or an amendment to our development code. The dispensaries themselves have an additional 1,500 feet from another dispensary requirement. So that once it's okay for a dispensary to be in a location and another one wants to come in down the road, not only do they have to be outside of that 1,000 feet from a protected location, then they also have to be 1,500 feet from another dispensary. So that would be we could only know that when they come in and apply after the first one does. So the definitions are there. We'll try to match those up. The district's requirements are there with the possibility of a waiver or a variance. There's some other protected locations that we need to think about, which I don't know that has been contained, but would you want a dispensary across the street from the jail, correctional facilities, law enforcement facilities? Would you want a dispensary across the street from Region 3 alcohol and drug rehab and those type of drug treatment and treatment and counseling places? Don't know that we won't be preempted on that, but I think that we could make a local argument that those are protected places as well. The edibles, those will be further regulated by the Department of Agriculture and the Mississippi Department of Health. The Mississippi Department of Health only, and they will have to be set up as a food establishment for the manufacture of prepared foods. The signs and advertising, both the Mississippi Department of Health, the Mississippi Department of Agriculture, and the Mississippi Department of Revenue will come up with advertising. We have a sign component or an advertising component to our development code, and it would only seem be reasonable to think that the same signage, billboards would have to be located in places 1,000 feet from protected places. I don't know, as far as the content of the signs, I don't know that we can actually regulate that, but we can regulate the time, place, and manner of those signs, the size of them, and things of that nature, as we do with our sign ordinance now. So the main inquiry, we started the ordinance, and it is the last part of the handout would be to create in Chapter 11, I think that is the supplemental rules similar to adult entertainment facilities, similar to manufactured home parks, similar to our alcohol use ordinances. And it would be a standalone with a tie-in to our general definitions and our table 4.3, and then our overall listing of things that can take place in each of the zoning districts, to include the downtown overlay district and any other overlay district. I don't know that I think all the rest of them are residential except for the mixed-use downtown overlay district. And looking at it today, they're very limited places that a facility could be located in that overlay district, not only because of the protected places, but because of the uses in that district. The mall as its own, it's not an overlay district, it's a regular regional commercial district. And so you might see some dispensaries in that area, but don't know that you would see any of the other facilities there. So in looking at these definitions, y'all please give me some input as you think about it as to what is a similar type use in our existing zoning ordinance. And the hardest part will be taking these definitions and plugging them into those tables and in those lists of things in each of the different descriptions of that zoning district. But we are recommending this so that if it were to pass, we're not scrambling. If the legislation were to pass out of the legislature and the city council does not opt out, and there's a provision on opting out that allows the citizens to call a vote to opt in or opt back in. So that we want to be able to have our development code, if medical marijuana comes to our city, that will be responsive to it and protect the different classifications. There will not be any public smoking of marijuana, so we don't have to worry about our smoking ordinance, and the public use will not be there. There won't be any outdoor grow. It has to be indoor grow of marijuana, so that that would not be things that we have to tinker with and figure something out. But we wanted to be ahead of the situation and provide some guidelines there based on the input today from you and from questions from the public. Once the council has any questions or input, we will fashion that ordinance and bring that back to you. We have, I apologize for Stephen and I have been engaged in a good bit of legal work. Stephen Reed, he's our assistant city attorney, and we have not, we're probably about 45% complete with the ordinance there, and I wish we could have had something that we could have tinkered with a little bit more today. But those are the issues, and how we're going to address them. And be welcome any, Mr. Chairman, any questions or input that you may have.
Do we have any questions?
One question is, I just wondered how our proposed law compares to other states that have the medical cannabis only law. Is it going to be very similar?
I do not know that. We've focused in on this particular piece of legislation that we will be using. I know that in other places we've looked at some issues as far as finance, banks have a position by the FDIC that it's a federal insured type situation, and the federal government does not recognize marijuana as legal. And so there have been financial workarounds in these other places. This particular industry has to rely on a great deal of cash to transact their business, and so we've heard that the best location for a dispensary is an old bank or a new bank that they'll just buy out, because you have a safe there and you have the ability to store that cash and then transport it to the bank. So it's a workaround with LLCs and things to make sure that a federally unrecognized activity can have those protections of the FDIC.
Well, the reason for the question is ones that are already experiencing that we could compare what they did on their development codes, and maybe, and see what problems they might have had already. This is all new to us, and so we don't know what's gonna be the problems.
Sure. And there's we compared signage and advertising to places, other places, and what they were doing there. We did it in terms of smoking ads and alcohol ads. But there's just since this is not federally recognized, it's kind of hard. You have to go with each state. The cities and counties are creations of the legislature, and if they preempt us on a particular issue, then we have to go with what they have. Take, for instance, our 21-1911, which is our demolition statute. And we have all the building codes and other ordinances, but when you come to tearing down a house or a building, you have to use 21-1911. And the legislature has spoken on that, and so that kind of, we can do some other things with those other ordinances and codes, but for that particular activity, the same thing will be present with this legislation. Just like beer, we have a lot more control over beer and very little over alcohol, because it is preempted by the state statutes. And I feel that the marijuana will be preempted by the state, except where they give us local authority.
Ben, this is Leslie Hart. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Great. So my only question really is about the classification of the pediatric clinic. It seems that we need to further define what a child care center really is. You know, does it involve extended stay? What is that? Because it potentially could just get confusing with other facilities that offer medical care.
I think that in the proposed language on the child care facility, means any child care facility, whether established for gain or otherwise, which regularly provides care for less than 24 hours per day for more than 3 children, including but not limited to daycares, after-school programs, pediatric medical clinics, and facilities whose activities are aimed at providing services for children and families, would be the first proposal out of the gate on the child care facility.
Okay, but just pediatric care facilities, but all general practitioners see children, and they see sometimes a good number of children, general practitioners, doctors. And so you've got that problem there too, that you'd have to be.
Exactly. It just doesn't seem to be that a pediatric clinic should fall into a child care facility, because they're really performing completely different functions.
In other words, that might, instead of saying pediatric care facility, it might be just any medical facility that sees children.
But then aren't we defeating the purpose of what medical marijuana is? Because if we start limiting medical facilities, I understand it, for those that are for drug and or alcohol rehabilitation. That makes total sense. You would not have a dispensary across the street. But for standard or specialty medical care facilities that in essence could be prescribing medical marijuana for their patients, it seems that we should not limit where it is in relationship to those. We already have what you're putting in the the development code of 1,500 feet distance between dispensaries. So it's not like we're going to end up with dispensaries on every corner. We know we've covered that. So truly my hiccup is with the pediatric clinic.
That's noted, and that's why we
Thank
pointed
you.
out those different distinctions there. What is a child care facility?
But the point is what Leslie was saying. I don't feature that a medical clinic that's going to treat anybody that's taking this cannabis is it going to be treating any children, probably. That
Well,
maybe, but I don't know.
It's my understanding that you go to the medical clinic to get the certificate of
Yeah.
need or eligibility, and that you can only purchase it at a dispensary. And those dispensaries are not drive-through, they're walk-ins only.
Could I ask if we're talking
And I'll
about,
just say that, I'm sorry, that there are childhood illnesses and diseases that have been documented and studied to benefit from some of the cannabis treatment. So we can't say who's going to be treated and who is not. Our job here is just to say where those can be located and the structure around that. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I will look at that again. I'm not so sure that the legislation opens it up to children under the age of 18, but I can't swear to that. That was not something that I was focused on when we looked at it, but I will go back through the proposed legislation and clarify that.
Thank you.
my question, Ben, was for places like martial arts studios, dance studios. Oh, it's me, yeah.
Mask,
I'm sorry, yes.
no problem.
The dance studios and martial arts studio, places where children go to learn certain activities. The police athletic league, things like that.
Okay.
Boy Scouts.
Boys and Girls Club.
The Boys and Girls Club.
And I think that there was somewhere that we addressed that. That may be the,
I believe that did reference after-school care.
after-school care.
Says after-school programs
Yeah.
under child care facility. So I guess would
Could-
that encompass what Patty mentioned?
Under the school facility, it would not necessarily encompass that, but it would, public-private church and parochial programs for kindergarten, elementary, junior high, and high schools. Well, I thought we had it. But it would, daycares, after-school programs, it would be under child care facility, Boys and Girls Club, church after-school programs.
Well, then we also are opening this up, or how are we, when you have children and family entertainment locations, such as that new play zone or whatever that is out behind the Mexican restaurant on the north side of Walmart. So Event Zone, I think is what the name of that, or roller rink. So what are the classifications for those kind of businesses, and keeping in mind those businesses come and go? And do we have an option of, instead of 1,500 feet or 1,000 feet, that when we are considering relationship to those family event centers, maybe the distance isn't quite so large?
I don't know that we would have if it is a protected place, that would be up to them to be able to give a waiver or a variance of the distance from that. I don't know that we could take away something that the legislature given to them as a protection.
we defining what is the protection zone for our city, or is the state dictating to us?
If I understand your question, there would be, the state would dictate the distance, and in some of these, could be viewed as a general type, what's a child care facility, what's a school, what's a church, that would allow us some flexibility in defining those, either broadly or specifically.
Okay, thank you.
And another question that I have that fits is I really would hate to see a dispensary across from the Bancorp South Arena. It's a public place. I'd hate to see one. I really would hate to see one across from the mall. The mall is a public place too. It's, of course, you know, if it's only sold to somebody for medical purposes, that maybe that wouldn't make any difference,
In the downtown overlay district, it would not be permitted. About the only place I can see that would be permitted would be across the street over here, across Elizabeth Street, in the area where Copper Banana is, and sweeping down that way along Elizabeth, and maybe on the south end down there.
And the other question that I had, does anybody have any idea of how many people, for population-wise, what percent of the population might be using this for medical purposes? I can't feature it being a large population. I can't see that the population that would use this for medical purposes would be very large. I really can't see where many dispensaries would be able to make a go of it with selling this.
Well, right now, those concerns would be something that the legislature will, if no special session's called, they will take it up in January. And so that if we need to voice those concerns either individually or collectively to our legislators that, hey, look, y'all need to take a look at this aspect of it, that aspect of it, the type of things that we're talking about now that are not being talked about in the legislature.
Ben, would you go over the opt-out situation? If the city decides to opt out, what is that process?
Within 90 days after passage, and I've been informed that at least they were looking at an effective date immediately. You would have 90 days for the city council to vote to opt out. And then the citizens would have a period of time that they could vote to opt in by petition. And if they didn't opt in, then you'd have to wait a time with patience before you could bring it up for a vote again.
Okay.
Or the city could change its mind and opt in itself to the voting authorities. It's not once we opt out, always opted out. It would allow the opting back in either by a petition of the citizens or by the governing authorities.
Okay, thank you.
So right now, you've got churches, schools, daycares, funeral homes, the children's clinic, but you don't have the jail, rehab, or you do have it as part of it.
We would look at those particular places in the distance requirements. I think that we did put a definition of a corrections facility and drug treatment, rehab.
Yeah, I saw them on the definitions, but they weren't listed on the map, so I wasn't sure.
No, they weren't.
If they were, so that's being considered, if this was to pass, those would be included or would not be included?
Well, it took a lot of arm twisting to get our GIS expert
Gotcha.
to go through and do that.
Yeah,
And we started out with just downtown.
Okay.
As a particular interest, and then we asked her to look at just those broader categories
yeah.
before we started defining other protected places.
Was
We
it,
have the definitions there,
Yeah,
and where we would deal with that would be in the part on the district's requirements, and 11.9.3.2 protected places. We would discuss in general, how the measurements are going to be made, whether they be from a multiple point of entrance or from one point of entrance. How we do it on alcohol is from the nearest wall to the nearest wall. And so it's going to be important how the legislature defines how those distances are to be measured.
so you're kind of waiting to see what the law says about the measurements, because that could change. We can't go more, like if they say it's main point of entry to main point of entry, then the city couldn't go wall to wall.
Right.
You can't go more than.
Well, we could, but it would be subject to challenge.
I understand.
And so that's why we kind of looked at multiple points, or multiple main points of entrance.
Huh.
These maps were designed off center mass of the structure. So
That could change a little bit. Another thing was the sign, you mentioned, so I guess that's another thing waiting on the legislature, because I know the city, Pat, correct me if I'm wrong, that you can't use the word beer, is that right, in the sign?
That was an older state law that has gone away.
But I know that we've had it before where someone wanted a sign and they couldn't use the word beer.
Yeah.
It had to be B dash dash.
Yeah, that'd be B dash, but so that would, there again, that would be kind of going back to what the legislature does. If they say that they have a right to use the word marijuana or cannabis, whatever, the city couldn't say, well, you can't use that, or you can't use the picture of a leaf or whatever.
that's correct. That would be more content-based. It would have to be reasonable time, place, and manner
Yeah,
type of restrictions on that, unless the state said they couldn't do it.
I got you.
And another question I had was on schools, the definition says for children through high school. I really think that there's a possibility, there are educational facilities for mentally challenged students that would be older, even full adults. There's also homes for those that would need to be in a protected position too, and they could be in either one of those, could be in a commercial area. So,
I probably think the Tupelo Center,
yeah.
All right.
Most of our congregate places are in residential areas. Is that correct, Pat? The congregate homes where we have...
Yes.
Okay, those are in residential areas.
Yes.
But like the one behind the Shell, on Eason, that facility that's behind the Shell station, a rehab halfway house.
Okay, I'm not sure about that one.
It's right there at Highway 45 in Eason,
Okay.
the Burger King and all that.
Tupelo rehab and
It's a rehab place.
nursing facility. There's one there and then one on Briar Ridge Road.
No, I'm talking about the halfway house.
Okay.
It's behind
Yeah, okay. Yeah, Dismas.
Dismas, thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I don't know that would fall under any of those protected categories, unless we were just to decide on our own to add it.
Other places do look at correctional facilities and drug rehab, treatment centers, the entertainment type categories, but and we'll certainly work that in here, subject to fleshing it out, debating it. But
And there, can I ask a question? There are limits on how much can be dispensed to a patient at any one time, aren't there?
I hear that is what is the biggest debate now.
Really?
They were talking about 2.5 ounces, and right now, 1 ounce is a felony under the Controlled Substances Act. So you're looking at being able to possess 2.5 ounces within a 2-week period. So it makes it kind of hard on law enforcement, whereas before they were looking at grams up to 29 or 30 grams, and now they're looking at 60, 75 grams.
Are there any additional penalties in any of the legislation that you've seen for someone who does have a valid card purchasing and giving to someone who is not qualified?
That would be a violation of the Controlled Substances Act.
Okay, so it'd be a pretty hefty penalty for.
And you have caregivers that can go and get it for you, but unless they have a card themselves, they can't use it.
Could we,
Is there any legislation, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead. That's it.
Is there any
Oh,
legislation
that's fine.
on hours of operation for these facilities?
That the state, the statute allows us to regulate time, place, and manner. So that, yes, we could put, got to close by 10 o'clock, 9 o'clock, something like that.
Okay.
Liquor stores, I think, 9 or 10 to 10. And so that they will allow us to restrict the time for those.
Would they be allowed to like open on Sundays?
I think that would be within our local control there.
Okay, okay.
Now, is it possible that we could say like no cultivation center in town? In other words, it looks like to me that that's something that we really might not want in the city, because you got to have police protection. That looks like that would be a good place to rob. I mean, and so, and I would just think that with the police protection, thefts, and stuff like that, we might not want any cultivation centers in town.
There has been some talk that the opt-out provision would be that you could opt out of certain aspects of it. I have not read that in the statute, the proposed legislation. That's just something that's been told to us.
So if we say in, we have to accept all of that?
Well, we will make sure that you can't, there are certain provisions that you can opt out of, but it's kind of like amending a motion to defeat the motion. There are certain aspects of it
Yeah.
that probably we could not opt out of if we stayed at the end.
Just as a point of interest, how large are these facilities?
I have no idea.
I mean, it says they're cultivating, and they're processing, and they're selling, or they're just the dispensary? Or they're all three?
All of these type of facilities are involved in the cultivation, testing, processing, transportation, research, and then ultimately the dispensaries. We will have a wide range of product from the actual leaf to edibles to oils. One thing on CBDs that there's been absolutely no guidance from the state on CBDs, and it's kind of run us crazy, Pat, Russ, on what to do with them. Our narcotics agents really don't know what to do there. There's just a lack of guidance there, and what we want to do is make sure that we don't end up that way with medical cannabis. But I think that what will happen here is that those products will be, the CBD products are low dosage first cousins of marijuana. And federal law says that you can use them as oils, but not for ingestion. And you go to any of the CBD shops here, and I think you'll find that they have gummies and actually have plant-based type materials for vaping and vapes and everything else. So we're going to have to do a better job on medical cannabis than we have done on CBD statewide.
Did we lose our Zoom?
We may have, is that a 40-minute limit? I don't know. Some Zoom sessions are limited.
Yeah.
I'm still here.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Well, the computer's
Can you all
trying,
hear me?
yeah, the computer's trying to update.
Yeah, I can still hear you as well.
Good.
Do we have any more questions for Mr. Logan?
Well, one other question was that it looks like, especially in the dispensaries, there'd be, as you say, a bank or something like that, it'd be quite a bit of security. Could we require that they use off-duty police officers to be there at any time they're open, and also have alarm systems in there?
We'll see if we can do that. And that would be a reasonable time, place, and manner restriction.
Any more questions? All right, I think we're good for now.
Okay.
We're going to open the public portion of the meeting. Is there anyone here to speak for or against this? You will approach the podium and state your name and address, and then you have 3 minutes.
Excuse me. Good afternoon, night, in between. I'm Kathy Grace. I live at 1502 Winter Valley Drive here in Tupelo. And I would just like to offer a little bit of information that may be helpful, and then I want to speak from a standpoint of families, because to me this conversation kind of got confused in that you were looking at where, or if we're going to have a dispensary, where to put it, and then it got into things like security guards and police and so forth, which I don't see at Walmart or Walgreens where there's a pharmacy, or at Kroger's where there's a pharmacy, because this is not about recreational marijuana. This is a prescribed drug that you have to have a card for, that there will be people who will definitely have the say-so to offer that card. So a kid can't walk in and say, give me a joint. It won't happen. The reason I'm bringing this up is that I have a family member who would not be alive today if it wasn't for medical marijuana. And I can guarantee you thousands of people in this county who are in the same boat. And what I heard tonight was not necessarily about the quality of life of people who live here. I heard about, and I know you have to do the zoning laws and so forth, but it seemed like you were making it harder than it needed to be. Because specifically, if this is a medical drug, then it would be where a pharmacy is. A pediatrician needs to be able to prescribe the drug, because this law is for children if the pediatrician feels that it is needed for seizures, for epilepsy, for other things that children suffer with. But the point is, I think, and I'm just offering, Senator Hobb Bryan is one of the main ones who's convened many committees on this whole process. He would know a lot of the questions, a lot of the answers to the questions that I think you all asked tonight. I also think that they have others coming in from states to answer your question, to talk about how it worked in Florida, how it worked in Arkansas, how it works in Oklahoma. And they have picked the good and the bad. And we have probably, when this passes, will be the most conservative law for medical marijuana in this country. And so I don't know that there should be a worry about crime related to this. I know police officers should be out about crime, but this is medical marijuana. This is to make a person's life where they can be productive and work if they're an adult. It is to relieve the pain of a child who cannot go to school because the seizures are so severe. So I would ask you to think about bringing in people who, from the medical community or from others like Senator Bryant, who has had a lot of knowledge. He spent a year, I think, studying this whole process to help you better understand, because I appreciate the fact y'all are trying to get ahead of the game, because it shows good planning and it shows good sense in terms of not being caught off guard. But I do hope that you will consider this from a standpoint of it is not going to bring about gangs or undesirables. This is a strict policy that really will be monitored by the physicians, and that it will not be something that people can get easy access to. So I do appreciate the fact that the pharmacies are very akin to what this dispensary would look like. I have been in dispensaries in Florida. I have been in those in Arkansas, and it is a building like a store. It's not a big warehouse deal. It's a store with all they do is sell the whatever you're coming to get that you have a prescription for. I also would say that my line of work is early care and education, and child care is defined by the health department. Licensed child care, there is a definition for that by the Mississippi Department of Health. And it also goes around with the after-school programs and some of the other programs you ask about. So I would just ask you, if you're concerned about the child care, to look at what the health department defines it as being. So thank you for my time, and I appreciate it. And again, think about the families and think about this as a medical drug like penicillin or the COVID vaccinations. This is a medical, this is an opportunity for us to help a lot of people to have productive lives. Thank you.
Is there anyone else to speak for or against? State your name and address.
Cynthia Tigrit, 419 Brown Street, Tupelo, 38804. First off, I do want to second. Okay, 100% what she said. You were talking about the grow facilities and the difference in the three. They won't be all under one building. There's going to be a grow facility, then there will be a processing facility, and then there will be the dispensary. I believe that with the excise tax, what happened was they took that 15% off at the dispensary, and they put 5% on behind it, so it's going to be the growers and the processors who pay that excise tax. You were talking about keeping it away from children. Absolutely. There's not one medical marijuana advocate who would tell you, yes, we want our kids to get stoned, yes, we want our kids to do it. Absolutely not. That is not what we're talking about. We're not talking about getting them drunk. We're not talking about getting them stoned. Like she said, this is medicine. I don't know if you've seen any of those videos of the children with seizures who, when they give them the RSO, the Rick Simpson oil. If you haven't seen it, you owe it to yourself and to all of the children in your family to watch it. It's a miracle. Okay, and this is what we're talking about. We're talking about those patients who are taking chemo, who can't keep food down, who are in their bed. As my personal friend, she weighed 73 pounds. Her grandson finally talked her into vaping. She gained 30 pounds. She had, not that she wasn't terminal, because she died 3 weeks ago, but her quality of life improved to the point where it was miraculous. She got up out of bed. She went to church on Sunday morning. She went to the grocery store, and no one had to take her. But the heartbreaking thing, the heartbreaking end of this story is that she died scared to death she was going to get busted for smoking pot. Scared to death of it. Afraid her community would find out and afraid that the police would find out. That is shameful. That is shameful. When she went to seek relief, all she found was stress. Thank you for your time.
Anyone else to speak for or against? If there's no one else, then we'll close the public portion. We're open for committee discussion.
Well, and I think this is a point that we need to bring. It's not that we're not concerned about the quality for the patients. It's just the fact that this is a drug. It is used as dope or whatever, and it is used for recreational purposes. And it is different than you would have with a lot of other things. And so it's the fact that we just need to be sure that we can control it so that we won't be having a lot of police protection problems.
What is, as a form of needing to make a motion, what, is this a approval of or disapproval of section 11.9? Is this, how would this need to be phrased? Because it looks like it's evolving.
Right.
So is this approval of what we have only what we have in front of us, and then more changes will be made and then you come back to us? Or is this, we're just talking about it and we need to make the approval later? I'm just trying to follow how this is, because you say it's incomplete, y'all 45%. Do we want to approve or disapprove something that's only 45% done?
If we could table this, we will, for hopefully your next meeting, with adequate time to look at the exact language of it. Want to discuss the larger concepts tonight, some of the more finer concepts, and with input, bringing you a finished product back either at your next meeting or a subsequent meeting.
Okay.
Okay, so that we are able to table it. It's
Yes.
not that something that has to be done tonight. That's what I'm saying then.
I mean, I can put that on the November 1st meeting agenda if you'd like to, for further discussion, and ask Mr. Logan to come and present any updates in 2 weeks.
Is that enough time to make? Are there any other questions we have for him now while he's here tonight, or are we ready to entertain a motion to table, or?
I'll motion to table.
Okay.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second to table until, you said November 1st, is that the date? The November 1st meeting? All in favor of the motion to table? And that's unanimous.
Aye.
Well, okay, y'all on the Zoom before, yes, that is a yes on there. Okay, so we will pick that back up at our next meeting.
Could I add that as a lot of these things are going to be zoning issues and are going to be a lot of fast-changing items, I appreciate the work that the legal department has done in putting this together, and with Pat of trying to put this into our current code so that we can make those decisions and have clear guidance on it. But I can see, as I've already seen with just regular applications, there can be different interpretations on almost every different.
Yeah, and I'm sure that no matter what we do, we'll come back to it.
Oh, yeah.
There'll be
but we're
updates.
always doing that. We're always doing that. It's never final.
I think we just look at the intent of the regulation and always work toward doing good by that, and we're fine.
All right. Pat, you said there's something else we needed to look at, another set of
Right.
amendments.
The committee members have been provided a draft of an amendment to Chapter 4. This is our zoning chapter. This is a sort of a technical adjustment. We've realized in dealing with property owners of some residential areas that there was a gap in the sequence of residential districts. You know, we have the lowest density agricultural district, and then low density and medium density and mixed use. And the idea is that you go from the largest lots in the agricultural to the smallest lots in the mixed use. Well, we found that there was a gap, that it was not going to be legal for anybody to create a lot that was between 1 and 2 acres. No zoning district allowed that. So we've had that request, and so we're going to correct that. And so what you had was just the switching out of 2 numbers in Chapter 4, the section on the low-density residential zoning district, to allow those lots to go up to 2 acres where they meet the minimum lot for the agricultural space. And then we're also changing the open space requirement to sort of complete that sequence, or, have that transition from lowest to highest.
I move that we accept your proposal.
And I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
All right. There we go. That passes. Is there anything else, Pat?
No,
We good?
Actually,
that's right. Yes, I'm sorry, I was forgetting that. We've been asked to share with you that Jimmy Swan has resigned from the committee. He's got some personal family obligations, and he won't be able to continue.
Eat that.
And Mr. Palmer, Ward 5 councilman, has proposed the name Bentley Nolan to serve on the committee. And so that name will be presented to the council.
Who was that?
Bentley Nolan.
One of the Noble brothers.
Right. Yes.
All right.
I've worked with Bentley, and if the council does approve that, he would be an excellent member of the council.
Yeah, at least there's more young blood in
I have
there.
a question. So, I'm sorry, what ward was Jimmy representing?
5.
And does the Nolan, Ms. Nolan
5.
represent the same ward?
Yes. Yes, 5. Are we good?
So we have a work session Monday night?
Yes, so there will be a work session Monday at 5:15, and then we'll have our meeting. So that's Monday, the 25th, and then at 5:15, and the meeting November 1st at 6 o'clock right here in the council chambers.
And if I don't get the packet, I'll try and get the packets out to you before the work session
Okay.
electronically, and then you can pick up a hard copy at the meeting.
Okay, what are we looking at on this meeting?
Right now, we've got the tabled item from last month, the West Jackson Street proposed project. We have a application for an expansion of a non-conforming use at 3811 Mount Vernon. It's the Native Sun Produce.
That's right.
Who wishes to add a building. And then we have a rezoning issue on behalf of the city to rezone a portion. We had a zigzaggy little zoning line for some area to correct that, and I believe that's it.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll make a motion, we adjourn.
Yes, all right, sounds good. Everybody in favor, leave.